So this is a lightning talk about something called the Beacon API. Has anyone used the Beacon API at all? One person, brilliant. The reason it's a lightning talk is because it's a lightning small API. There's very little code involved, but mostly what you need to know is around the concept about why you'd use it and just kind of knowing it's there. I think it's really useful. There's so many things getting put into the web platform all the time that we don't necessarily know are there. And if we don't know that they're there, we can't take advantage of them. So I called this push button receive beacon because I thought I was being funny. But Beacon API is a JavaScript-based web API that is in pretty much all modern browsers, and it's for sending a small amount of data from the browser to the server, but without waiting for a response. And that turns out to be a really, really critical bit of the Beacon API and why you'd use it. So it's not only that you don't need to wait for a response, you actually don't get a response from it. You fire your data at the server and it doesn't return you anything. So your server could do what it likes, but you're never going to know about it in your script. It's a W3C candidate recommendation. It's there ready to use, proper web standard. So why would we want to send data from the browser to the server and not care what the server has to say about it? Turns out there are a few really, really common things that we do that fall into that model. One of them is analytics. So doing things like logging page views, logging how people interact with JavaScript-based stuff in our interfaces, timing how long people spend on a page, all the sorts of things that like Google Analytics might give you in a general sense, you might want to do in a very specific sense in your application. There's things like diagnostic logging. Say you've got some code which works absolutely fine for you, but you keep getting reports in production from users who are getting errors and you can't reproduce it. Well, you might want to put some code in there to catch that error if it ever occurs and send some diagnostic stuff back to your server to help you debug it. If you're running multivariate tests, A/B tests, that sort of thing, you could be gathering the results from those. So there's all sorts of different ways. Basically anything that fits into a logging model where you would just like write it to a log file, you can do the same from a browser but write it to the server. Now, you might say, hey Drew, we can do this already. And you'd be right, we can do it already. We can do it with the Fetch API. Anyone use the Fetch API at all? Probably have, even if you don't realize it, your framework's probably using it. The Fetch API is basically a nice modern standardized version of XML HTTP request, aka AJAX, which we've had for, 12 years, something like that. So we can do this. We can send stuff from the browser to the server, no problem. So why on earth would we need the Beacon API? What's all that about? Crucial thing, unlike everything else, the Beacon API is non-blocking. When I said you don't get a response from the server back to your code, it's because we don't know when the browser is actually going to send that request. When you use the Beacon API, you say to the browser, okay, send this data, and then you just get back whether, yes, it's received that data will be sent, or no, there's a problem. But the browser queues it in the background, and it doesn't block the execution of your code. Turns out this is like really, really super important, especially for things like analytics. So say you were timing the amount of time somebody spent on your page. You would start your timer when the page loads, and when the page finishes, when the user leaves the page, that's when you want to log that data to the server. If you were doing that with the Fetch API or with XHR, running the code to make that HTTP request would block the page unloading and would basically cause a delay in the user navigating from one page to the next. So your performance goes through the floor. It just feels like either your site is laggy if that's where the next link is going to, or if you're linking out to another site, it feels like the site that you're linking out to is laggy because there's just this weird delay after clicking the link. Because Beacon queues the request, the browser then just deals with it when it can. So it might choose like a moment when the CPU is at a lull, or if the network's offline, it might wait until it comes back online. It's basically up to the browser to send that in a timely fashion. It shouldn't hang on to it forever. It should do it relatively soon, but at the optimum moment, and your code doesn't have to hang around for it. Okay, so how would we use it? It's really simple. There's a send beacon method on the navigator object, and you takes 2 arguments. One is URL, and the other is the data you want to send. So I said it was lightning quick. It's a little bit more complicated than that. It returns a Boolean, so you know if the browser has accepted it or not. You don't know anything, as I said, what happens to the server, because that's going to happen while you're essentially disconnected from the process. But the browser will tell you, yeah, that's okay, I've got that, or no, I'm not going to accept it for whatever reason. These requests are posted, so when you give it some data, it's an HTTP post. And if you've used the Fetch API, there are several different types of body that you can send with the Fetch API. There's blob, there's like these array buffer things, there's form data. You can send all these different types that are specified for the Fetch API. Well, these work the same for the Beacon API. If it's just key value stuff, which it often is, I like using form data. So I might set up something like this. Here's my URL. I'm going to create some data, which is a new form data, then give it hello and world. Then just pass that in, navigator.sendBeacon to this URL. Here's the data. And I find out if it's been queued or not. And as far as my server's concerned, that'll just come through as if it were a form posted. So there'll just be post variables. I'll get the variable hello is equal to the value of world. So really easy. Browser support is surprisingly epic. It doesn't work in IE. Oh well. But it is there in Edge. It's not there in Opera Mini. Oh well. But it is there in every other mobile device. So pretty good support. And the nice thing with it is that it's really easy to test if it's there or not. You can just literally say if navigator.sendBeacon. And if it's not there, well, maybe you could fall back to XHR or something that those older browsers are going to understand. Or maybe you don't care that much. Depends what you're doing. And depends on your audience, of course. So really easy to test for. So I was saying about, timing a page load. So put that into practice. Your page load, set a global variable start time using performance.now just to give me a nice easy timestamp. I don't care actually what time of day it is, just a timestamp. And then right at the bottom, I'm using the before unload event and then calling my function, which is just going to test to see if Beacon is available. And if it is, it'll pull in that global variable, the start time, send that as start, grab the current time, send that as end, and the URL of the document, and server can do the rest. Nice and easy. Interestingly, I'm using before unload rather than unload itself, because Safari on the Mac throws security warnings if you try and do anything to do with Beacon in the unload event. Who knows why? I couldn't find out why. All I could find was frustrated people experiencing it. But it works fine with before unload, and it effectively will give you, in most cases, the same thing. Unless you've got something else also running on before unload, which cancels the event, but edge cases. Couple of considerations with so much of this to do with logging. It's always worth thinking about things like GDPR. What are you logging? If you're identifying sessions, is that within the scope of what your current policies say you should do? So that's always worth thinking about. It's not just email. And the do not track header. Have people come across do not track header at all? It's an option you get in your browser where you can express that you would rather things didn't track you. And it gets sent through as an HTTP header, either DNT0 for I don't care about that, or DNT1, please do not track me. And if you're being nice and polite, you would look for that header, and if you're doing tracking, perhaps anonymize that event that you're tracking, or just don't track it, obviously depending on what it is you're doing. So that's it, that's the Beacon API. Dead easy, just useful to know it's there. And I'm at Drew M, and all my slides are on Noticed, which is where the best people are putting all their slides these days. Not that I built it or anything, but Noticed /Drew M is where you'll find all that. Thank you very much.